Welcome to another episode of Pod for Good, a podcast where we learn from those doing good in the world, why they care, what we can do, and most importantly, what you can do. Pod for Good is produced and edited by Random Productions and can be found anywhere you get your podcasts. I am, as always, your chief philanthropod and class clown for not prejudging AIs, Jesse Ulrich.
And I'm your vice admiral philanthropod and class clown for our future AI overlords, Chris Miller.
And today, our guests are Aaron Bean and Jess England from Asemio.
We talked to Aaron and Jess about how Asemio enables nonprofits in our community, how they build data infrastructure, and we geek out for most of the podcast about databases and AI.
Enjoy. We are very excited to have Aaron and Jess from Asemio on the podcast. Aaron, Jess, how you doing today?
You're so good. Excited to be here.
Yes, it's lovely outside. I feel like Chris and I have to talk about the weather on every episode, even though most of these are recorded like months ahead of time.
Yep.
So it makes it's no
sense.
It's not useful to anyone at all, but it's beautiful in Tulsa today.
Yes.
So Aaron and Jess, you are both from Asemio LLC, I assume. Asemio and LLC, and not an S corp. That's way too much inside.
Dude, are we going to jump in on tax law as the first
No,
one?
it does come up
like
Everyone's
sometimes.
lost already.
Well,
I'm out.
yeah. Listen, I'm interested as a business owner, but no. Can you tell us what Asemio does?
Absolutely. So we are a social enterprise located in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we work specifically on employing data and technology for social good. We work with mission-aligned organizations in philanthropy, state and local government, as well as nonprofits, always with that idea in mind of how we can better leverage technology for an improved society.
Mm-hmm. So we help organizations collect, make sense of, and if they so choose, share the data that they're collecting.
So we're going to get into the nitty gritty of that right now because former nonprofit professional, volunteer, board member, whatnot, also kind of data
person.
Data person. Again, still don't know what you do.
That's fair.
Not all data people suffer from that.
Yeah. Something about efficiency. That's all I know. What is in the corporate world? I assume there's a certain set of specifics and people who make the decision about what data is necessary, what data gets transferred, who gets
You'd
to see
think
what data.
that.
You would think that, yes. But in the nonprofit world, I feel like you're dealing with a lot of people whose their strong suit is not this part at all, and they don't have people necessarily whose strong suit is the data, is the database side of things. So I guess my first question is, how often do organizations come to you and there's like, here's our stuff, what do we do with it?
All the time.
every day?
All the time.
Every day?
That's why we're here.
It is not an uncommon experience for somebody to ask us for help with XYZ. It's usually, we need a dashboard, we need a report, we need something like this. But it's focused on the output. But then when you peel back the onion layers, it's like, wow, we're not actually collecting any of this data. So what do we do? So that is, all the time.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because we've talked in the past about unpacking the idea of data. Because on one hand, it gets confused. Data and technology get confused. And in the nonprofit space, it's true that there's not typically the amount of resources to build out what you would see in a private enterprise where you have a whole team working on data and technology and infrastructure, et cetera. So from that perspective, the space is under-resourced. From an infrastructure and technology perspective, often it's looked at as like a commodity. However, if you consider data as the facts and figures that tell the nonprofit story or the human story that underpins the constituents being served, then nonprofit executives and providers and team members and philanthropists, et cetera, are very good about understanding and articulating the data. And so when they come to us, oftentimes they realize they have a story they want to tell, but it's not organized in the right way to be able to tell it accurately or convincingly. And sometimes, as Jess pointed out, they're not actually collecting the information they need to tell their story the best way.
And it's another challenge that they face too. So very often is that they have multiple different audiences that they have to satisfy in terms of creating reports or the community or their constituents or their own internal team. And it becomes really complex for them to try to manage. And as you said, Aaron, that's often on a very limited budget with limited resources. And it's going to be a bit of a gnarly mess to try to tease apart if you don't have somebody who's day in and day out thinking about these kinds of problems and has seen it before.
So I serve on a community investment panel for United Way. So I get to see a lot of organizations and them trying to use data to tell their story. And generally, anytime they're telling the story, they're great at it. If they're trying to say, here's an example of what we do. But when they're trying to give generalized outcomes of their programs, they seem to struggle with coming up with useful data sets. So how do you kind of marry those two needs of being able to effectively tell your story, but also provide data to organizations like the United Way who want to see hard outcomes?
Well, there's, a couple of different things to think about. There's another dimension here too, is because another piece of that puzzle is what do they need to do their work, right? And so often the data that they're collecting is data that's captured in real time, boots on the ground when they're right in front of somebody who needs a bag of groceries or whatever the case may be. But a lot of it is understanding, what are some of those, what are the external needs, right? So sometimes it's really clear. Grant reports, right, have very clear expectations. We want you to show XYZ, like what was the change from last year? We need you to report on these different things because we're interested in funding these things and it makes sense. So understanding what's expected of them, but then also there's, I think, different things that you can do to help them think creatively about the data that they do have, right? What's quantitative, what's qualitative, and how can you draw different outcomes? But what would you add to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, love that you're working with the community investment part of the United Way. We're part of the United Way's giving campaign every year and have been for many years, and love the United Way and everything that you all do for the community. The core of the question is, makes me think about the foundation of how we think about knowledge and how we create knowledge. And we think about that as science and human story. And so when we say that they're good at telling a story, oftentimes we mean that they're good about something that connects to us or resonates with us emotionally and that we can just understand from our human experience. The science part of that can be a little more difficult. When you talk about outcomes specifically, we're talking about something that tends to try and be more sciencey, and there's there's logic models and methodological frameworks you can use to try and connect those dots. But one of the real challenges about social problems is that they have this aspect of wickedness that you can tear at and define them in different ways and try different interventions that change along with the problem itself. So the adaptiveness of this actually requires different methodological frameworks and then your process that underpins that has to be underpinned by different technology, infrastructure, and processes there. So it's actually not just a technical issue, it's very social in nature as well.
So along those lines, it is a case where, organizations like United Way foundations do a lot of great things trying to fund organizations, but they also want to be good stewards of their money. And so they're out there trying to figure out how to measure the effectiveness of organizations. So how should they be measuring the effectiveness of the organizations when you are dealing with problems that are evolving over time?
Well, first, unfortunately, we have a lot of low-hanging fruit. And I say unfortunately because in the space we're talking about, when we talk about poverty and access to education and food and housing security and home stability, the challenge is these problems change so quickly and often that, as we were speaking to earlier, you need a different adaptive way of looking at these problems. One of those answers is around something called natural world experimentation, or using the data inside the provider systems to describe the problem itself. Let's use a real example. So let's say you're looking at something like chronic absenteeism in the school district, and then you want to know if there's a correlation there with students that have a parent who might be incarcerated. So you have to bring those data sets together and say, well, how many of these school kids have a parent that lives outside of the home in a prison or jail system? And to do that very, very quickly, you can answer some basic questions around descriptive statistics and correlations. Like outcomes is a whole nother level of efficacy that we're trying to reach. However, a lot of organizations can't answer the simple, basic descriptive statistical elements to even build your theories of change off of. And that's kind of like one of these really nasty problems that communities around the United States are trying to solve, that Tulsa has advanced far beyond most other communities in being able to answer. So upon that foundation of simple descriptive statistics, we can now start to build out more higher order theories of change.
And it sounds like that would require probably a lot of data sharing between organizations to be able to do that effectively. If the school is tracking absenteeism and the school is probably not tracking which students have parents that are incarcerated, you probably have to go to a different system for that. So how do you get the different organizations to share data together so that they can define the problems appropriately?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
And can you see the gleam in our eyes?
I know.
This is a tricky question, but yeah, go ahead.
It's at the core of one of the things that we've spent a lot of time thinking about. You're exactly right. You need data sharing to answer these types of questions. You need to answer these types of questions in order to rapidly evolve alongside these wicked problems. So how well does data sharing work? Well, depending on how you look at it, not very well.
Mm-hmm.
So historically, meshing data together from these disparate organizations has been difficult for good reason. There's legal protections, there's ethical protections. So some people might be of the position, well, gosh, why don't we just put all the data into one place and then research the heck out of it and answer all the questions we need to do better good in the world? Well, that's a little Pollyannish in the sense that we're not going to do that for political reasons, for social reasons, ethical, legal, et cetera. However, if you can answer the questions or somehow merge or mesh the data without sharing the personally identifiable sensitive information, then you can start to tackle those problems more quickly and easily. So here in Tulsa, we have one of the only privacy-preserved data ecosystem infrastructures in the United States, meaning we can actually do that here in Tulsa. There's a few communities in the US that can do that, but we can answer these questions and connect those data sets across disparate organizations without sharing Tulsa personally identifiable information and the residents in the community.
Who controls that? Like, where does that live?
That's a great question. And it is federated. So who controls it is the group of individuals that come together to answer a specific question, right? Now, with that said, the partners sharing the data all opt in or out on every question that gets answered.
Yeah. So we don't ever hold on to any data sets. That's a question we get asked a lot was, well, what data do you have that could be used for this? And none. It's not ours to share. It's not, if we're using it for a particular project, we're the stewards of that for a very specific purpose. And
so this is gonna be real inside baseball. So it's like a Mastodon situation, right? Where like no one controls. There's no central server. There's a series of individual servers that then connect to share information, but no one has the key to it.
So if we want to dive into the technology architecture, it's really interesting to compare because it's on the spectrum. So if you think about Google as centralized, so all of my Google email and notes and documents are centralized in Google's servers, then you think about something like Mastodon or how many cryptocurrencies work as decentralized. In the middle is federated, which there's some centralization, some commonality. It's not completely decentralized, but it's also not completely centralized. So the centralization that happens, for example, is around an individual project where you pull in the services related to answer the question and the linking keys across those data sets. So it's not truly decentralized in that sense. We're looking at projects to push it into more decentralization, but there's some technical issues around that haven't quite yet been solved.
So I know even within an organization, it can be very difficult to get disparate data sets to join together. So how are you doing this when you're dealing with different organizations that have their own different data structures, their own primary keys and everything else? So how are you even able to bring those together?
Mm-hmm.
So your great question. We had to, in essence, create a new infrastructure that we use. It's like a Swiss Army knife of a combination of ETL work, master person indexing work, de-identification work. But basically what we've done is we take dirty data sets that are unlinked, because these primary keys that organizations are often using to link their own data are often themselves not working, right?
Yeah.
There's, we assume everything is coming disorganized and disconnected. And whenever we run it through our system, we normalize it to the different types of nomenclature that's being used for this particular question. For example, a school system might call an individual student, and a justice involvement system might call an individual an inmate, right? So we're normalizing the nomenclature and the semantics, but then also at the same time, we actually are deduplicating those data sets before they get fed into the greater system. So we do that based upon linking algorithms that we know are tried and true and efficient, which don't require primary key.
So I'm getting back into my development database mindset here. But you would have to dedupe before removing the personalized individual information, though, right? Because otherwise it'd be impossible to dedupe.
Right.
So there is a computer that or a system that does see the personal information, gets it in order, and then that same system then removes.
Yeah, I like that. I like how technical y'all are getting on this because it's fun to talk about.
Yeah.
Because you're highlighting a lot of nuance here. You're exactly right. And the infrastructure that does that must reside within the organizational governance domain of the organization that's happening at. Otherwise, you're back to a data sharing agreement, right? So we have an appliance. We can do this virtually through cloud infrastructure, but most organizations may not have that capability. So we literally have built a laptop and put our software architecture on it, and we'll ship it to them. And so they have it inside their domain. We basically connect to that remotely. Don't ever see the PII. They put the PII on that laptop, and we just see the output of the cleaning as it's happening. So we have an idea of the structure of the data ahead of time, create some config files, pop it in, and something that might happen, we might say something like date of birth is required, and an error that'll output will say rows 101 through 304 don't have anything, and it's supposed to be required. And they'll go back and go, oh yeah, we forgot. We changed systems during the several months and weren't capturing date of birth for a little while. And we'll say, okay, with those records, do you want us to reject those, include them at a lower level of efficacy of linking, et cetera? So we're basically doing surgery on the data without actually seeing the data.
Gotcha. So you get kind of like data integrity kind of validation reports that you can see without seeing what the actual data was, so that you can clean it up and get it to the level you need to actually get into your ecosystem.
Exactly.
It's a fascinating problem to fix because you can't, you'll know if there's a problem, but like the problem, the way it's described to you is going to be vague. It's just going to be like missing headers versus like missing information. So you're not going to know what the information is that is not being sorted properly. You just know that it's not there. And you're like, and you tell them to fix it, and then you run the thing again.
Got it.
So do you find that sort of structure over time improves like the data literacy of the organizations because they are being forced to clean up their own? I mean, you're giving them direction, but they're actually having to do the cleanup before you take over?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many advantages to doing it this way. One, you now aren't assuming what the data means, because when you have a traditional monolithic data warehouse, you've loaded all the data in, you've transformed it. Months later, the original data has probably changed meaning by then. So that's one advantage. Another advantage is these organizations often highly value data cleaning and integrity, but they don't get the time and energy and resources to focus on it. So we're able to quickly give them back real-time information about numbers of duplicates or about those missing data. And they can take that back to their case management system in real time and then make changes to the database. It was just today that I was seeing some Slacks in our channel go through about some data normalization best practices that weren't being met by an organization. And it's pretty easy for us to say, hey, by the way, on your database, you might want to separate these fields out. It'll help you in your reporting now and later. And all of that comes basically along with the service.
I'm mostly just like both fascinated and amazed because so in the nonprofits I worked with, we weren't like they weren't service type nonprofits. So the data of like who we were helping in that individual moment it wasn't important because that's not what those organizations did. But I know a lot of your clients and organizations you work with are ones like who are out in the community doing things on a day-to-day basis. And so like that's the information that the organizations both want to know if they're doing a good job, and two, that they can use to then try to raise more money. And on sort of the reporting to like funders and foundations and cities and whatnot, have you had to do is part of this system also like a sort of almost like a translation where you're taking the data and putting it into terms that the end user / funder is looking for? Or is it also a conversation with them about what this data means?
So I think now if you're talking about, so the technology that we've been describing has been incredibly valuable for community data sharing initiatives where you have multiple organizations that are sharing their own data sets that want to understand, is there overlap? What can we learn? And then if it's an individual organization just working within, we probably wouldn't necessarily, we may use some of the functionalities to help with the cleanup, especially for reporting standpoint. So just making that point of distinction. And in terms of helping them, you were asking, right? Like if we're helping them make a meaning out of their data, and then maybe, can you restate that question again?
So, okay. So there's a breakdown, I feel like, in between the organizations who are doing social good and the people who want to fund social good, in the sense that the organizations kind of know better how long something is going to take. And while funders want a little more like almost like quarterly reports of how well things are going, and some societal problems take a long time. And so like, is there you seem to have conversations with organizations about the language of data and standardizing and whatnot. Does that happen, or are you not involved in sort of the conversation on the funding side of like, this is what this data means, this is like what you're looking for, you're not gonna be able to find yet in this sort of corpus of data?
Mm-hmm. You have a thought on that?
Yeah, because what you're teasing at here is when data transforms into information, knowledge, and wisdom, right? And where on the spectrum are we involved? And we're involved the whole way, really. As much as we are, we're technologists at the core. That's where we want our value to be. But oftentimes, when translation happens across data sets, you may use technology, but you're now making meaning, you're harmonizing meaning across data sets, even the inmate versus student question they were talking about earlier. And then you have a client or a patient or a community member. And so we're often there when these types of concepts are getting discussed, like, what does it mean? What's a school year? What's recidivism, right? And since we're involved in that conversation, we are coloring with our, objectivity or lack of it, what those things mean. Now, we try and stay further away from the meaning making as it comes to judgments about things. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? When we're defining recidivism, for example, we might bring up other definitions we've seen used. We may have an opinion, but at the end of the day, the domain expert who's providing that service, who's working in that space, really knows much better than we would about that.
Well, I guess like what's funny is like, the fight in sort of nonprofit funding is like, one, it being called overhead, and two, like what that actually means. And what's funny is like what you're describing, this incredibly useful thing, most funders would consider this overhead and not, this is like taking away from the thing that they're trying to help, even though to prove that you are helping the thing, you need this data. And so I mostly just wanted to, yell at some funders for a second there with that question. But
I would say that I think that's changing. But because I think that more and more funders are realizing the necessity and aren't even classifying things that previously would have been overhead as overhead, right? They're allowing, as an example, there was a time when executive director was 100% overhead, where now they're allowing organizations to look at an executive director and say, you know what, X% of them are actually supporting programs. And I think it's the same way with stuff like this, where they're able to say, hey, you know what, this data is actually driving our programs, supporting them. So I do think it's getting a little bit better from that perspective.
I would agree with that. We've seen that trend happen as well, where more funders are both, willing to make those investments in some of these like foundational systems that really allow these organizations to go further, to do more, to understand what they're doing, the impact that they're having, but also an awareness too on the asks that they're making in terms of that kind of grant reporting, and not even realizing how much goes into it, right? And especially if you don't have a system that has these reports that are automated or things like that you can rely on, it's a very manual process. It can be very tedious. And we've seen a shift in that, certainly, as everybody's kind of realized that technology is more than just a commodity product. It can be a differentiator.
I do think there's still some of those like scoring websites that score nonprofits for the public to know what. Those still, I think, have an outdated understanding of what's overhead, and it can sometimes drive individual funders away from nonprofits.
So Asemio's been around for, I guess, over 10 years now, and technology moves very quickly. And so I guess like it's going to be an impossible question to answer, but...
Always a great preamble.
It's a favorite type of question to get asked.
So I guess from when Asemio started to now, what has been the most helpful sort of like technological advance?
Oh, that was the easy one. I think you had a harder one.
I did pivot there at one point. But,
do you want to give us the harder one? I think
the hard one is just like a much longer version of that question, which is, I guess, what has what has changed as far as like technology and social good in the past 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the, because we're so in the business of trying to predict the future that I'm used to the really hard questions. I mean, we may take a call and someone's like, I need a dashboard, and how much does it cost? I'm like, well, we're going to have to talk to a little bit more of requirements on this detail.
Yeah, do
right?
people think just dashboards exist on their own?
I mean, that's more
yes, actually, yes, people do.
They
Again, like, so I
open
not
up
just-
my trunk and pull out a dashboard.
Yeah, well, you have to understand,
companies, corporate, nonprofit, everywhere people think dashboards.
Right.
You just say a dashboard and it becomes a reality.
I mean, again, like you have to understand, even at the places I worked had an IT department. I was the IT department at every nonprofit I worked at, and so like it was always those like, okay, yeah, you're asking me this question, but like, what is the point of this question? What is it? What is it you're actually asking me? Because a dashboard is a representative of your data. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have a database. I bet it already has a dashboard function. You probably don't know how to use it.
Well, and that's the thing. This is why that we think in terms of technology and then the data and the information, knowledge, and wisdom, because it's a proxy for, there's some information that they're not getting. There's some wisdom that they're searching for that they can't get access to. So I loved impossible questions. And so let's trace that one down. How has technology and social good shifted? And I think, and how might it shift in the future is also an interesting, like even harder part of that question. So historically, one of the things that I feel like we really got right as a community and as an organization is we knew that privacy was going to be so important over the next X amount of years and then some. And so, gosh, I want to say back in 2016, we started looking into privacy enhancing technologies, had several years of R&D effort until we finally settled on the architecture we're on today. But we were ahead of the curve, and now we're seeing privacy enhancing technology come through the federal government as a big press, through state governments and local communities in most parts of the U.S. We'll probably be the last to see that, but in Tulsa, we're the first. So over, 7 years ago, we were looking at privacy enhancing technology. Then it's been 3 years now. We've had generative AI in our labs, and most people didn't even hear about ChatGPT except for maybe a year, maybe 18 months ago. So another one that we feel like we got right in that prediction. And what we're looking at now, so if you want to wonk out and get ahead and then come back 3 years from now and dunk on us if we're wrong, is we are predicting the further decentralization of technology because of the polarization and in our society and the lack of will to want centralized control, right? And no matter who you're talking to, that's a pretty common thread, unless they're the people that are benefiting from the centralized control. And so data mesh as a modern data architecture is something that's fairly jargony still in the tech space. It gets used a lot in marketing and stuff. But if you go deep down into what it means at the root level, that's something we're investing in now. So I think the way that technology and social good has changed over the last 10 years has been some things haven't changed. We still want more privacy, more security, quicker access to information to answer questions. What has changed is we have new tools along the way to enhance the things that we like and want more of, and to de-risk the things that we want to mitigate.
And something else that hasn't changed, that's been a constant throughout this, and this is a common challenge, especially if you're talking with an audience that sees technology as a commodity, is like, why doesn't this work? Let's just get a project management software and then we'll all be good project managers. And it doesn't work that way, right? The eye rolls, the subtle shaking of the heads.
Sorry, Jesse's been through like 700 different apps and tools and notebooks trying to do this.
In my personal life, I'm always trying to find whatever new to-do list thing. But also in companies, they think there is a software solution when it's actually like a thinking and strategy process solution.
That's exactly the point, though, is that there is always going to be a human element, and no matter what technology you bring in, even the things that we're talking about that we're looking at 10 years down the road, it relies heavily on understanding the human behavior. Do you understand what processes need to be put in place? Do you understand how those are going to be adopted? Do you have the right culture? So something else, that we've spent a lot of time that we developed, I think in probably around the same time, 2016, was this data ecosystem framework, of which there are these really critical areas of advancement that talk about the culture, governance, and infrastructure. And technology is just one piece of the infrastructure. It's just a bullet point underneath that, right? Tech isn't going to solve all your problems. It's going to be really awesome when it does. It's going to amplify the work, but a lot of the work happens over here on the human side of things.
If you're like me, you might hear estate planning and go, ugh, gross. You might think to yourself, I'm not sure why I'd bother with that. Estate planning is only for the uber rich.
Tallgrass begs to differ. Tallgrass founding attorneys Laurel and Riley think everyone should have an estate plan. They know estate planning seems untouchable to a lot of folks, like something you have to do inside a stuffy law firm of Stuffy McLawyer Pants Esquire.
But I promise you, Tallgrass is nothing like that. For one, they work out of their home so their clients can feel at home. They obsess, because they're nerds, over making clients feel like they belong and are supposed to be there. Also, their kids might make an appearance. They will take time to answer all of your questions, even the uncomfortable ones. They will work relentlessly to make sure your plan's exactly what you need to feel secure and at peace.
So if you've been putting off planning for what's going to happen after you've gone, it's time for you to give Tallgrass a call at 918-770-8940 and start your plan today. Or visit their website at tallgrassesstateplanning.com and schedule a free initial consultation. For free! It's right there on the website.
And of course, there's more, because this is a podcast ad. If you tell them you're a Pod for Good listener, they're going to take 25% off their service fees. Just tell them Pod for Good sent you. Stop thinking estate planning isn't for you and give Tallgrass a call today at 918-770-8940 or on their website, which I'm not going to read out to you again. It's in our show notes. Thank you, Tallgrass.
So speaking of the human side, I mean, I know from my own experience and my day-to-day job, people will get really invested to build the thing, right? Whether it's spending money, manpower, whatever. The hardest thing is getting them to maintain it, right? So that downstream it stays useful. So how do you get people to continue to stay invested, to keep that going?
Well, there's two things that I would say. There's also a middle part that I would add in, which is the change management process and adoption and use, getting people to use it, when you're building it. And that starts at the beginning of the build project, even in the design of understanding who are your stakeholders, who's going to be using the system, whose lives are about to change for the better often. But sometimes, you're going to move people's cheese. They're going to get, it's not always fun. Change is hard and scary. So understanding that from the get-go, building towards that, addressing those concerns, setting good expectations, making it easy for people to adopt a system. Is there good training? Do you have internal supports? Who's the person that they go to for questions? That's just going to help with adoption. Then you're going to have those connection points and people are going to know who to go to when their own workflows change, and then you can have a conversation. But every system, the nonprofits, the organizations that we work with, what they do will evolve, especially as they grow. It has to. And these systems that we build, first of all, we are working with systems and tools that can evolve with them. So you can make changes, you can add on to it, it's extensible. And then, but there is an expectation that it's not a set it and forget it kind of a tool, right? You're going to have to tend to it. You're going to have to invest in support. And so, that's something we talk about from the get-go, especially if you have a custom system as well, because you're going to need to spend some time thinking about what is changing. So we have processes and tools to help support, but also just being, checking in intentionally and having a maintenance process just within the organization, regardless of who is helping you with your system and your technology. Is it working or not? And how do you know? So we have, we help give some ideas on how to do that. And here are some questions to ask.
So I'm a hard pivot, a slight pivot, because you mentioned generative AI. And so I want you to answer some questions I personally have, which is
it's always a fun topic.
Yeah.
There seems to be different categories of AIs, and some categories have names, some categories don't seem to have names. So at the moment, just out in the world, things people might read about, what are the different kinds of AIs that currently exist?
Yeah. So artificial intelligence becomes like a catch-all, right? But most of the time, what we mean these days when we're talking about AI is machine learning. And machine learning is where, basically statistics is used for machine to learn how to solve a certain kind of problem. And a certain kind of problem could be how to pick the right movie, or it could be what's the right route to get from my home to the next meeting I have or the next event that I have. Or it could also be to predict the next thing in an order in a sequence, right? And so the world's become quite enamored with generative AI, which is named because of the GPT technology that was popularized by OpenAI, but was actually originally, it was a paper from Google, Attention is All You Need, that kind of came up with this new architecture for machine learning that could, do these amazing things. So the types of AI out there, though, that we're interested in that run most of our lives today are typically forms of machine learning.
And by machine learning, you mean just like the statistical breakdown of what people are wanting to do, going to ask to do, and how to sort of answer those questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. What does machine learning mean? Because we can anthropomorphize a machine, but it's not like we're sitting it at a desk in a classroom and writing on a chalkboard. And I don't think that's the best way we learn anyway. So that shouldn't be how we should do that. But what happens is the machine is given a problem with a set of problems with answers, right? So it could be, is this thing the letter C or not, right? And then a series of answers. Yes, this is C. No, this isn't C. Yes, this is C. No, this isn't C. And the machine has a way to look at that using math and see when it was wrong, how far off was it wrong? And then it tunes its own algorithm to try and guess a little better the next time, get a little closer to that answer. And by doing that, if you're giving it that training data that actually has that labeled, then the machine can, quote, learn how to guess better next time. So you're giving it a whole bunch of tasks with answers to it and grading it and giving its grade back to itself. And then after you feel like you have a model that's good enough, you take data that's never seen before of the similar kind of problem and you show it to it. And that's how you test it and see if it's working.
So I think this is an impossible question to answer, but
They already said they like those.
they do.
Those are our favorite.
So you're probably more familiar than I am, but every time I feel like every once in a while a big company will try to test some sort of generative AI. My favorite example is the Microsoft one they released on Twitter. That within within an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, or he started spitting out like racist propaganda and Nazi-esque things, which as a Judaic studies person always cracks me up. How do you control what a large language model learns? And I guess who gets to decide where the controls are on what it's learning and why it's learning it?
Man, so we have not answered this question as a society yet. And depending on which nation you talk to, which perspectives, or a legislator, or, someone in a big technology company. So at Asemio, the way that we're thinking about that is one, regardless of who should be controlling that, who is controlling that right now has been decided for the moment. And so you look at something like GPT-4 and the massive speed at which OpenAI has been advancing its market stance, and then the massive speed that the others are trying to catch up to OpenAI, then we kind of think about the world we live in. And that's fairly unregulated right now. It actually almost led to OpenAI's demise, how unregulated it is, if you followed the interestingness.
I do.
Yeah, yeah. So the way that we think about controlling that now is one, knowing where AI is already in your infrastructure, because this is the first step is you probably are already using AI in different ways and shapes and forms, and you may already be even using generative AI and may or may not know it. So know where it's at. And then where we use it in our side, our infrastructure, we require a human in the loop to make sure that bad things aren't happening. Another technique is to use other AI to monitor AI. And this is the one that I think is going to have to be the long-term technique, because AI is going to outpace us and already is at some tasks so fast that a human can't keep up. So OpenAI has a super alignment team that's funded. I think it's 20 or more percent, maybe 25% of their compute power is dedicated to what they call creating a super alignment artificial general intelligence that can basically, you can think of it like we're birthing some entity of some sort, machine entity, and we don't know the limits to its power, and we're trying to birth the good entity in case we accidentally birth the bad one, right? We're almost at that level.
Yeah.
That's so what you're saying is the only thing that can watch AI is another AI.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Almost certainly. Like in cyber right now, all of, AI hackers are going to be so much more further advanced than human hackers that you better have an AI defender to keep control of it. Imagine trying to battle an AI to figure out what the right route is on the highway from here to somewhere else right now. Like, how are you even going to do that? You're going to have humans along the entire route looking, at maps or with video cameras or talking to each other, or even if you got the data back the AI is using in real time, like how you can't interpret it. It's just what humans are good at versus what machines are good at.
And so, sorry, real quick. So when we're talking about like generative AI, like, so for example, when Google Messages sees me typing something and or even when Gmail does this and it thinks it knows what I want it to say for the rest of the sentence, that's generative AI, right? Or is that just an algorithm that is...
That could be predictive, just predictive. It may not be generative AI. It could be, there's algorithms to predict before generative AI that were used in, I don't know, for many years now on your phone and whatnot.
So here's a dumb question. How many algorithms does it take before it becomes an AI?
I feel like we should all work on that together. Enough when it can convince you it's an AI.
Yeah, there you go.
That's that number of algorithms.
And then you won't think it's an AI.
Yeah.
So,
What I was going to say is I think a lot of companies now are also putting up a lot of privacy controls to where even if somebody like Microsoft is providing the infrastructure for a large language model, they are partitioning it off.
Yeah.
So only inputs from their organization go in, and those inputs cannot be used to build into a larger language model, right? So and I think that is probably another avenue you'll see is that certain organizations will just partition their own off. And so that'll be a way that they control is by restricting the inputs and where the outputs can go.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. And this gets into, I guess, a very metaphysical part of the conversation, which is when you're feeding these models information, again, it's not regulated. So there's no correct answer to this question, but like, how do you decide what to feed it? Just like with a baby in the world, what information do you give it so it understands the universe at large and how people operate and what is good and what is bad? How do you tell an AI what is good and what is bad?
That's definitely a Jess question.
Yeah. I'm the resident AI expert too, as evidenced by this. I'm like I think I'm curious what your response is, but what I would say, I mean, it comes down, I think, to purpose too. What are you, if you're, Chris, you were talking about kind of having these organizations that partition something. We set up different agents that rely on generative AI to process different pieces of information that we're using just to expedite things, right? There's a very clear boundaried purpose. That's part of the prompt. And then you're feeding information that would help. I mean, I guess that's not really probably the best analogy, but I still maintain, like, I think it comes to purpose too. And then that also explains or gives some guidance maybe on how broad you want to go with what you're feeding it versus, is it very narrow? Is it,
Yeah, I guess like it's all.
Like, are you teaching it to find outliers in your data set, or are you teaching it to solve world hunger, right? I mean, you're going to feed them different things. If you're trying to teach it how to, look at trend data and tell you and interpret it, you're going to teach it very different things and probably not really teach anything, whether it's good or bad, just tell me what the data says.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm concerned about sort of the implicit bias in the data you choose to give it, right? Because most of us don't know that what biases we're putting in. So like, how are these large AIs going to react? Like, I feel like this came out a lot, especially like post 9/11, a lot of this came out in like surveillance equipment and like how it was flagging more people of color than it was white people and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's not regulated, so there's no way to control it at the moment. But like, how does a company building one think about their own implicit biases first before feeding information into one of these?
So a couple interesting points on that. One, there seems to be perhaps a correlation to model efficacy and disparate amounts of knowledge, regardless of the ethical judgment on that knowledge. And the weirdness that comes out of that is the more you constrain a model, the less efficacious it can become in answering questions. But it's also not unsurprising, because if you consider a child versus an adult, they have less knowledge and specifically constrained around certain things, which is good because you want to maintain that experience of being a child and have them only deal with situations that they have the skills to deal with. But you don't necessarily want an ignorant AI on some issues. So how do you feed it the knowledge, but give it ethical boundaries, right? Is really what we're questioning. And The problem with that is we don't have a way to do that well as a society. How do we determine what is right and wrong? And we've spent time thinking about that because this is a totally relevant question. And I feel like the unsatisfying best answer that I have at this point is that we have a triangulation approach to the systems and the uses. And what I mean by that is, and it's multidimensional. So let's take a question about, which is an ethical question about what even should we be asking about our community? What questions should we be exploring? Which of the wicked problems should we pick first? And how should we explore those problems? We have community resources, state and local government, private philanthropy, direct service providers that are all going to be pointed in that direction. So how do you make that an ethical process? Well, we think by getting a diverse set of individuals giving input, and especially the individuals that are represented in the data sets that are being studied. So I think with AI, it's the same thing. If there's a question around whether AI is harmful or not, we need both like a diverse set of perspectives. We need those individuals that are being maligned by the use of these tools to have a voice in how those tools are being built. We also need multiple different, a legal perspective, a security perspective, a scientific perspective. And then by synthesizing those perspectives together, then I think that's the best option. We have to decide what are the good and bad boundaries that we use around these things.
So how far? So I guess I'm a big sci-fi fan. So my biggest concern is always like, how are we going to give these systems the constraint to not just realize we're the problem and to get rid of us, right? Like the Ultron problem, right? Like,
yeah, of course.
How do you teach
Skynet?
The Skynet problem, right? Like,
yeah.
how do you? I'm not technologically savvy or in this field enough to know like how, when you're asking one of these AI systems, like you're not asking it to solve a problem yet, right? You're asking it how to help solve a problem, I guess, right?
Well, no, I mean, people are asking it to solve problems all the time. Like, just to be clear, like we're asking it to help. Yes. But this danger is real. And, so kind of what you're talking about is like the paperclip problem, right? If you give a super intelligent being a simple problem to solve, like making as many paper clips as is possible, and then it suddenly realizes that the Earth itself is a great resource it can use, so it builds a platform in outer space and just consumes all the Earth, and just along the way humans like just to make paper clips because that's the problem that you had it tuned towards, then that's a problem that we're talking about here. And there was a really interesting tech advertisement I saw from one of the big tech providers that said, who will become conscious first, the AI or us? And I thought it was really, I like their marketing.
Yeah.
But I think it reflects the answer to this is, you know what? I think humans really we should consider ourselves as being threatened by some existential risk of whether it's global warming or AI or aliens, whatever your choice is, and consider ourselves like we should perform better as a species. And my hope is that if we do that, and if we do that, then, if AI does evolve into super intelligence, which would be beyond human intelligence, that then there would be good reasons to keep us around. And I know this sounds like we're in the realm of sci-fi and fantasy. However, like leading, technologists, researchers, investors, state governments across the world are all seriously considering artificial general intelligence in the next decade or less as a possibility. And I don't know that we've ever been as aligned as before on that. The problem with that is once we have a machine that can think at or above the level of a human in most economic tasks, chaining those machines together and creating multiple civilizations that are all working on a problem in real time can create more advanced intelligences that are then surpass humans. So that's the problem.
Yeah. So I guess that's the question I was trying to get to, which is once AI sort of breaches that human level, it's going to like instantaneously jump that level. Right? It's not going to stay at the human level for long.
Mm-mm.
Terrifying.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's interesting because I know some of the older engineers, programmers are of the opinion that AI can't surpass humanity because it only does what it's told to do. So by its very nature, it can't. So what is the argument for why it can effectively go beyond its programming to be able to surpass?
Someone would have to ask it to, right? Program it to.
Well, no, I think so. Part of what gets lost here is the probabilistic nature of like machine learning. And so it's not so direct. It used to be there was this whole divide against on artificial intelligence, on a rule system, you just tell it every single possible outcome so that it knows all the outcomes and can choose the right thing in the circumstance. But life doesn't work that way. And the vast amounts of data we get, visual input, auditory input, et cetera, and a machine can have many more streams than a human can. So instead, it started generalizing rules. And the problem with that is now it's not deterministic. So you don't have to tell it necessarily to wipe out all of humanity. It could get there as along the way. Now, I don't want to over sound like, oh my God, it's the end of the world and whatnot, because I think that there's some very real technical limitations and, we may never get there. However, any technologist that is saying, well, no one ever gave it a direct order, like, first off, hasn't seen the internet, because as soon as one kid hacks into the right weaponized AI, it's likely someone's going to troll it and give it the order, right? War games. Right?
Yeah.
So that's not a great argument. But aside, it's also just incorrect, because these machines are gaining reasoning skills in the sense that they're passing psychological tests, like theory of mind, in a sense that whether or not you believe they metaphysically have agency, they can act in a way to make decisions down a path that could lead them on any path. That could that could be, your Roomba deciding to like trip you in the middle of the night, like an angry cat might.
Yeah.
Or it could be, trying to, optimize to solve world hunger.
Right.
So Jess, so after hearing that, which you probably hear all the time, like, how scared are you? Like, I know how scared Aaron is. How scared are you? As the sort of the project manager side of all of these issues.
The one that doesn't know the guts of the system in the same, like, intimate way.
Like when you go to work every day, you're like, today's the day the computer's going to kill me.
Humans are pretty scary in their own right.
You know what? That's fair. That's fair.
Am I stereotyping?
There's a lot of
Yeah, you are.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I think there's so much that we don't know, and we have to be very cognizant of the potential for insane negative, we really need to be cognizant of the potential for a lot of risk and a lot of negative impacts. And there's also the flip side to that too. It could be a really incredible tool, right? Even if whatever it does to help support, or not, or just how it is in the world, just the fact that maybe this will be something that will rally people together, right, against common cause. Like, and that's a little Pollyanna-ish, I think.
No, like the pandemic did.
Right? Yes, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Too soon.
But I don't know. I think there's plenty to be scared of. This is one on the list, and then you can't let it overwhelm you. Otherwise,
no, I think that's a good point. You give it the problem of solving global warming. Maybe it comes back and says we need to kill 50% of humans, or maybe it comes back with some amazing solution that fixes everything.
As long as it gives us the multiple choice that we get to choose from, I'm okay with
could
it.
Either kill half of everyone or do this.
Who built the Thanos
AI? We have really got into a lot of the guts and the technology, which I love talking about. But I do think I don't want to miss a little bit the story behind it. So can you talk about a little bit about some of the ways that people have really used this technology to make a difference in the community? I feel like that's part of what we should be talking about.
That's true.
But could you talk about that?
Specifically generative AI.
No, I mean just in general what Asemio does. And if you could talk about some of the things that you've been able to do in the organization or organizations that you've enabled. Just so people can hear beyond the awesome, cool, interesting technology, but how it actually helps.
Yeah, this is the toot your own horn section of the
podcast.
I see.
Sweet.
Yeah. No, we probably each have a list of different things. Well, I mean, first of all, we're equipping these organizations with tools so they can do the work. Like, they're doing it, right? We're just along the sides cheerleading them, helping them think about it differently, and giving them tools to move in the world in a different way. There are so many different examples, whether it's enabling organizations that are providing like basic needs to people who need a bag of groceries, right? Just at the very individual level, we've helped these organizations understand what the need is in the community to ask for more funding, so people get the help that they need. Do you want to talk about any of some of the spotlight?
Yeah, I would love to. One specific local organization that we built the data system for, Women in Recovery, is an organization of family and children's services, and they're an alternative to incarceration program for women and the families that they serve. And I'm very proud to be their partner, one, because FNCS is such a cornerstone of our community, and two, because Women in Recovery is often lauded nationally as one of the best direct services programs in the United States to model. So being a part of their data and technology journey is always something that I'll be proud of. So Women in Recovery is a great example of a local organization that we've worked with. Another organization in the early childhood domain is the Birth Through 8 strategy for Tulsa. BEST, it's a GKFF funded program, and they focus at a system level across the early childhood domain on children that are birth through 8. And they actually, about, was it 4 years ago, right before the pandemic happened, we were piloting as a community our privacy enhancing infrastructure, and they implemented it to look at how evictions were impacting the school system. And Impact Tulsa, another amazing collaborator in the community on the education space, took that information and ran with it. They do their own analytics and research on the education system. And then Impact Tulsa started spreading that into other evictions work and how that helped school children, which resulted in a better understanding of how the schools specifically were affected by evictions, and then also led to a notification system when a family who may be facing an eviction is at risk. So the work that Impact Tulsa has done, that the George Kaiser Family Foundation, the Birth Aid Strategy of Tulsa has done, that Women in Recovery has done. Oh my gosh.
There's Assist OK, which is a coalition of different basic needs organizations. And that's 5 or 6 different organizations that are pretty small organizations in their own right, but they've come together to really just create this fascia, this like great network of basic needs support. And then, Restore Hope is one of those organizations, but they played an instrumental role during the pandemic in providing rent assistance. I mean, they just absolutely went from down here to up here in terms of just their ability to expand the dollars that they're distributing to community members so they can stay in their homes and that they're not getting out. And that's still happening today too. And they're able to know, have we helped this person before or not, just based on the information that they track in these systems that we've built.
Yeah. And the Tulsa Higher Ed Consortiums use this infrastructure to look at higher education institutions and how they can better support students there. The Oklahoma Policy Institute has done a lot of great work curating the eviction data set that's used in the aforementioned work. Community Action Project, we worked with them on implementing improved care coordination for some of their resources and supports. And all this is just in Tulsa. Tulsa Innovation Labs, Tulsa Remote. In Tulsa, there's so much economic and social improvement work going on in Tulsa right now that we feel just humbled to be connected to. And that's, again, in our local community. The other cool thing to highlight about the work that's been done in Tulsa is we're able to share that nationally. So more and more you see at conference circuits and academic journals, the highlights that Tulsa is doing. And I love being in Chicago or in Wales and seeing Tulsa pop up in a presentation as a best practice to emulate.
That is amazing.
So for anyone listening who is like interested in any of the topics we mentioned, maybe not the AI ones, but all the other ones, if they're an organization or if they are like a concerned citizen, like how can they best help you? Either you individually or you as a company.
Always reaching out with a question, an opinion, a comment. We're incredibly excited and passionate about being in dialogue because so many of the questions we've talked about today don't have answers that you can open up a book and go to page 19, row 8 and get your answer. And the only way that we're going to have satisfying answers for these is to stimulate community dialogue. So you can always reach us on our website, www.asemio.com, asemio.com. And that information form right there will go directly to our inboxes. So always happy to take time out for a coffee or a chat.
And I believe you also have a podcast people can subscribe to.
We sure do. Asemio Decoded. So you can listen to that. I would say the other thing that people can do is to think about, within their organizations, especially if they work in the nonprofit or the mission aligned, space, is to be thinking about how are you using technology? Where are there areas for improvement? Does it make sense that you're collecting this information? If yes, why? How is it being used? Get curious, understand that, and be a voice in your organization too for how to better make sense of the information you're collecting, and just be thinking about how you have a role in it. That helps when everybody's thinking about these tools, instead of it feeling like, oh, this is just a box that I need to check, right? It should be supporting the work you do and the greater work of the organization. And it's helpful because then you can be a person that we talk to if we're working with you.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you both for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
This was fascinating.
Mhm.
So
Well, thank you both for having us. This was great.
It was a pleasure.
I feel
Yeah.
less scared about AI now, so that's good.
Oh, okay.
So again, I shouldn't other AI.
Mhm.
I
That's
feel like
right.
it's bad. Yeah. I should let it prove. I should let it be.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you both.
Let it prove to you it's evil before you assume it's evil.
That's how it gets you.
Well, thank you all so much. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
you.
Very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for listening to our conversation with Aaron and Jess. Hopefully, it does not fill you with a sense of existential dread. Please, if you work for a nonprofit and you are having issues with your data, please call Asemio. They are great. They will do a great job for you. Also, make sure to check out their podcast, Asemio Decoded. And of course, talking about following things, please make sure to follow Pod for Good on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, maybe TikTok. I think I've done 1 or 2 now. So check those out. Please subscribe, give us a review. If you're going to give us a review, you got to say something. That's all.
Unless it's a 5-star.
Unless
You
it's
can,
yeah,
you can give us a
listen.
free 5-star.
If you're going to give us less than 5 stars, you have to say something.
Mhm.
See something, say something. As always, Broken Arrow. I haven't heard anything recently, so you get another pass. Tulsa, get it done. Be kind to people out there.